Hello, my name is David Zsutty, and I am the Executive Director of the Homeland Institute. Our latest poll surveyed 779 respondents who are representative of white Americans aged 18 through 35 on the topic of natalism. For years, people have pondered, how do we raise white America's birth rate? To what extent can demographic decline be solved through state intervention, if at all? Are pro-natalist policies even electorally viable? Thanks to our latest poll, we finally have hard data to guide the discussion. We began by comparing how many children respondents currently plan on having compared to how many children they would have if they could have as many as they could. We found that among white Americans aged 18 through 35, 87.3% of Democrats, 85.1% of independents, and 72.2% of Republicans currently plan on having 2 or fewer children. This is alarming because for a population to remain stable, each woman must have on average 2.1 children. This means that a vast majority of white America plans on below replacement level reproduction. While 2 children are enough to reproduce their parents, 3 or more are required to reproduce the nation. Based on how many children respondents plan on having, the current projected birth rates for Republicans is 1.7, Independents 1.14, and Democrats 1.11. For white America as a whole, that number is 1.32, which is well below a 2.1 replacement rate. But there is hope. The birth rate for white Republicans, if they could have as many children as they want, would be 2.54, for independents 1.8, and for Democrats 1.67. White America overall would be at 2.0, just shy of replacement level. Admittedly, some respondents may have unrealistic ideas of the ideal conditions for having a family. But this shows that despite feminism and anti-natal propaganda, there is still a substantial segment of the population that would respond to financial incentives to have more children. To remedy any problem, one must first understand it. Thus, we ask why people aren't having more children, so we can better understand the root causes of low birth rates. We first ask them to select all barriers to having more children, and then ask them to identify their single biggest barrier. Respondents could also list that they already have or plan on having 2 or more children, along with if they simply just don't want to have children at all. The difference in natalist attitudes between Republicans and other respondents was highlighted yet again. 63.1% of Republicans stated that they already have or plan on having 2 or more children, compared to about 45% of independents and Democrats, and 28.6% of Democrats and 31.7% of independents answered that they just don't want to have children, compared to only 12.7% of Republicans. The financial cost of raising children overall garnered the most responses across party lines, with 33.2% of all respondents, 35.9% of Democrats, 38.5% of independents, and 23.1% of Republicans selecting this option as a barrier. The overall financial cost was also ranked the single biggest barrier across party lines at 9% of all respondents, and 7.6% of Republicans. The cost of good housing, along with the cost of medical care and insurance, were also notably high across party lines. Concerns about the type of world their children would be born into, doubts about whether they would make a good parent, and children interfering with having fun were also high overall. But these answers were driven by Democrats and independents, who listed these reasons at roughly double the rate as Republicans. Concerns about the environment, climate change, etc., the cost of paying for their children's college education, and a preference for adoption were even more highly skewed towards Democrats and independents. Women are an essential part of childbearing and rearing, so we also broke down the responses among women. We found that slightly more women than men of all parties responded that they plan on having, or already have, 2 or more children. The number of women who just don't want to have children was almost the same as for men across party lines, as was the number of women who answered the financial costs of raising children overall. Doubts about whether respondents would make a good parent slightly decreased among Republican women to 8.7%, but spiked to 22% of Democrat women and 22.2% of independent women. The number who selected children interfering with doing fun things decreased slightly among Democrats and Republican women and rose slightly among independent women. This should challenge the notion that women are driving low birth rates by putting off childbearing for frivolous reasons, even if they're louder about it on social media. We also found that white Republican women, like white Republican men, are practically immune to the anti-natalist propaganda about climate change and the environment, which is suspiciously almost entirely directed at white countries, which already have low birth rates. Republican women were also no more easily swayed by dramatic hand-wringing about the general state of the world than Republican men. But would pro-natalist policies actually work? And if so, to what extent? Based on data discussed in further depth in our poll report, pro-natalist policies should have a 0.1 minimum and a 0.3 maximum effect on the birth rate. So it's reasonable to assume that the actual effect would be around somewhere in the middle, at about a 0.2 increase. Let's compare this to Hungary, which enacted a suite of pro-natalist policies in 2011. Hungary was able to increase their 2011 birth rate of 1.23 by 0.32 to its current rate of 1.55, which is close to our 0.2 projected increase. While 1.55 is still below replacement level, it is still a marked improvement over 1.23. Thus, Hungary suggestively corroborates our poll findings. We still don't know what the absolute minimum birth rate is before triggering a demographic catastrophe, characterized by tyranny of the old, calls for migrant workers, and exploding national debt. South Korea's birth rate of 0.7 certainly meets that threshold for demographic catastrophe. Japan's 1.26 probably does as well. Time will tell what number is enough to avert disaster, but given the stakes, it is best to aim for as big of a cushion as possible. Some people, such as Edward Dutton, have argued that there will be a natural rebound in birth rates and nationalist attitudes if politics primarily flows from biology, and only the most conservative and naturally pro-natal people are having children. But the fact that South Korea and Japan are further down the road of demographic decline than the West suggests that relying upon a natural rebound would be cowardly optimism. State intervention is required. Having established the necessity of pro-natalist policies, we next explored their electoral viability. Overall, more respondents answered that they were at least a little less likely to vote for a candidate who proposed pro-natalist policies than respondents who answered they were at least a little more likely. Women were also less likely to vote for a pro-natalist candidate than men. However, pro-natalist policies are still electorally viable for a populist Republican candidate, given that hostility towards pro-natalist policies is strongly driven by Democrats, whose votes aren't in the cards to begin with. More Republicans were still more likely to vote for a candidate with pro-natalist policies at 37.5% than those who were less likely at 18.5%. And most importantly, more independents were more likely to vote for a candidate with pro-natalist policies at 28.4% than those who were less likely at 21.4%. And while unregistered voters were overall hostile towards pro-natalist policies, they can't vote less than they already do. And there are already a number of hot topics which have failed to send them fleeing towards the opposition. Thus, pro-natalist policies may be a way to attract a small, but possibly decisive slice of unregistered voters. But most importantly, natalist policies may offer candidates a new, creative way to be pro-life that is electorally viable after the Supreme Court made abortion a hot topic again after overturning Roe v. Wade in the summer of 2022. Hungary enacted several aggressive natalist policies in 2011, and by 2021, their abortion rate had dropped by a hefty 41%. Pro-natalism is pro-life. So, What specific natalist policies would have the highest impact? We next asked respondents to rank how likely a number of factors and policies were to induce them to have at least one more child, using a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being very likely and 1 very unlikely. The most highly ranked factor was making it easier to support a family on a single income instead of 2, with 32% of respondents rating it as a 5 and 20.4% as a 4, for a combined total of 52.4%. Among Republicans, 39.2% rated it as a 5 and 24.6% as a 4, for a combined total of 63.8%. The next most highly ranked policies and factors, in order of preference, were making housing more affordable in general, a graduated lifetime income tax break for parents, free or subsidized medical care and insurance, financial help for first-time home buyers who are parents, and a lump sum grant of $10,000 for each child. While if many of your friends became parents too was second to last in the rankings, it's important because it shows that the other policies will have a small ripple effect. We next asked respondents which suite of policies were the single most likely, second most likely, and third most likely to induce them to have children. A lifetime 50% income tax break for parents of 2 children, and a 100% lifetime income tax break for parents of 3 or more children was by far the most popular policy. 22.5% of all respondents and 26.9% of Republicans ranked this as the single most likely policy to induce them to have children. There is a clear trend overall of concrete financial incentives being the most likely to induce people to have more children. Policymakers who are serious about addressing America's demographic decline will have to tackle how a middle-class family lifestyle has become difficult to afford. There is no cheap or superficial fix for low birth rates. Policymakers should especially consider a graduated income tax break for parents. Hungary proves that this policy works because it was the cornerstone of pro-natalist policies passed in 2011, which successfully raised their birth rate by 0.32 over a decade. While this was expensive, low birth rates often lead to calls for immigration, and the cost of immigration for the average taxpayer is in the long term even higher due to depressed wages, crime, and social services, as explained in depth by Ann Coulter in her book Adios America. Additionally, an income tax break tends to only reward the productive segments of society, which should allay concerns that it would devolve into just another welfare program for the dregs of society. Most states have an income tax in addition to the federal government, and our poll did not differentiate between state and federal income tax. It is logical that a state income tax break would have a smaller effect than a federal income tax break in proportion to its size. This means that we can address low birth rates on a state as well as a national level. But there is no easy fix for low birth rates. Our poll revealed that the difficulty of raising a family on a single income was of great importance, but addressing this will invariably clash with several powerful interests. Feminism, which lauds women in the workplace, even if it ultimately makes women miserable. Immigration, which depresses wages while increasing the cost of housing. And corporate greed. But businessmen, who may be opposed to the idea of single-income families, should seriously ask if they can truly insulate themselves from collapsing birth rates and its secondary effects. Doing nothing will lead to civilizational collapse. If our options to avoid collapse are reform or revolution, we would be wise to choose reform. To conclude, pro-natalist policies would be effective and electorally viable, and especially a graduated income tax break for parents. However, they are still not enough on their own. Pro-natalist policies would work best if they are synergized in a trifecta of reducing immigration and combating feminism. This is a difficult fight, but since relying on a natural rebound in birth rates would be cowardly optimism, it is a necessary fight. Because if we do nothing, America will face demographic collapse.